Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My wife said, "Do not come to my office party. It will be awkward with my ex there." I told her I would stay home. What she did not know was that her company had just hired me as the new regional director, and the chief executive officer had invited me to the party as a surprise introduction. The moment she saw me step into that ballroom and head toward the executive table, the color left her face so fast it looked as if someone had switched off a light behind her eyes. My name is Warren. I am 35 years old, and until that night, I had been married to my wife, Bria, for 7 years. We met in college when neither of us had much money, much patience, or much idea of what adulthood was supposed to look like. We built the first years of our life the hard way, with cheap furniture, secondhand dishes, and long talks at the kitchen table about the kind of future we wanted. I still remember the first apartment we shared after we got married, a narrow place in Philadelphia with crooked windows and heat that worked only when it felt generous. Bria used to sit on the counter while I cooked and read little pieces of her work aloud to me, asking which line sounded stronger. I used to joke that I married her for her laugh and stayed for her edits. Back then, she would reach for me in her sleep. Back then, I believed the ordinary routines of our life were proof that we were solid. We had traditions that felt too small to matter until they were gone. Saturday coffee from the same corner place. Sunday grocery runs where she always added flowers to the cart, even when we were trying to save money. A standing agreement that if one of us had a miserable week, the other handled dinner Friday night without complaint. She liked lemon candles in the fall and thick blankets, even when the house was warm. I knew how she folded towels, how she lined up her shoes by color, how she got quiet when she was angry instead of loud. She knew I overthought everything and pretended not to notice when I counted future expenses in my head. We had been talking for months about selling our house and moving into something larger. We wanted another bedroom, a small office with better light, and a backyard big enough for children. We had finally started saying we might be ready for next year. That was the part that keeps coming back to me. I was not just losing a marriage. I was losing a future I had already started building in my mind. About 2 months before the party, I started interviewing for local executive roles because I wanted to be home more and travel less. I had been working remotely for a consulting firm, and although the job paid well, it drained me in ways that were easy to miss from the outside. Long hours at a screen, late meetings, too much mental carryover from one day into the next. Bria had not complained directly, but she had started saying little things about how distant life felt, how everything had become schedules and logistics. I took that seriously. I wanted to fix what could still be fixed. When the opportunity opened at her company, it felt almost too neat. Better money, stronger upward track, fewer flights, and a chance to build something in the same city where our life already existed. The process was confidential and handled through corporate. Bria knew I was interviewing for local positions, but I kept the specifics quiet because the offer had not been final, and I wanted to tell her only when it was real. When I signed, I planned a dinner for the following weekend, so I could surprise her properly. 3 weeks before the party, something shifted in Bria. It was not obvious enough at first to sound like a warning if I described it out loud. It was more like a change in rhythm. She started carrying her phone from room to room. She used to leave it face up on the counter while she showered. Now she set it screen down or took it with her. She smiled at messages and then looked up too quickly if I happened to glance over. One night, I came downstairs around midnight for water and found her in the den with the lamp off, the brightness of her phone lighting half her face. She startled when she saw me, then laughed and said someone from work was venting about a campaign issue. Another time I leaned over to kiss her cheek while she was texting on the sofa, and she tilted the screen away without meaning to. It was a tiny motion, so small it might have meant nothing. I noticed it anyway. What hurts most, looking back, is that she let me keep loving her while she was already stepping away from me inside. She still took the small comforts. She still accepted the care. The week before the party, I came home with takeout from her favorite Thai place because she had texted me that work was crushing her. She hugged me at the door with real warmth, or warmth convincing enough that I could not tell the difference. We ate on the couch. She rested her feet across my lap while I told her about one of my final interview rounds. She even smiled and said, "I know you were trying, and I appreciate it." That same night, after she fell asleep, her phone buzzed on the side table twice. I did not look at it. I remember seeing the screen glow in the dark and deciding trust mattered more than suspicion. 2 days later, we walked through an open house just for fun and stood in a nursery-sized bedroom, talking about paint colors we liked. She slipped her hand into mine there. She let me picture our future while she was texting another man behind my back. The conversation about the party happened the following Tuesday while I was making dinner. I had chicken on the stove, music low in the background, and she was leaning against the counter scrolling through her phone. She watched me for a moment longer than usual before saying my name, in that careful tone people use when they want something unreasonable to sound harmless. She said, "About the holiday party on Friday. I think it might be better if you skip it this year." I looked up and laughed at first because I assumed she was joking. She had brought me every year before. When I saw that she was serious, I turned down the burner and asked why. She hesitated just long enough for the answer to arrive before the words did. She said her ex, Preston, would be there. They had dated for about 2 years in their early 20s before he moved away for work. I had never met him. I had barely heard about him over the years, and old pictures from that part of her life had long since disappeared from her social media. I asked the obvious question, why would that matter now, after all this time and all these years of marriage? She stepped closer, folding her arms as if she were cold, and said he had been acting nostalgic lately. She said he had reconnected through work after relocating back to Pennsylvania, and he had been asking about old times. She told me he had viewed her profile, messaged her on a professional platform, and made a few comments that felt too personal for her comfort. She said she did not want any awkwardness, office gossip, or tension at a company event. I told her if he was making her uneasy, she should report it. She dismissed that right away, but not so bluntly that it felt like a confession. She said she was trying to avoid drama before promotion season. She said the easiest thing would be for her to have one drink, make the rounds, and come home early. Then she touched my wrist and said, "Please trust me on this." That was the sentence that did the most damage because it turned my best instinct against me. She did not just ask for space. She used the fact that I loved her to remove the one witness she did not want in the room. I agreed, and afterward I even felt guilty for questioning her. That is what real betrayal does. It makes your good qualities feel like mistakes after the fact. Over the next few days, she acted almost sweeter than usual. She thanked me for fixing the loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen. She kissed me before leaving for work and asked if I wanted anything from the bakery near her office. Thursday night, she sat with me at the dining table while I reviewed notes for what I knew would be my final conversation with corporate before my transition. She rubbed my shoulders and told me she was proud of how hard I had been working. That line stays with me because by then she was already lying to me about her marriage, misrepresenting me to Preston, and arranging a night that required me to disappear for her convenience. She was accepting reassurance from me while feeding him a story about being neglected. She was telling me she appreciated my effort while telling him I barely noticed her. It was not confusion. It was strategy with a soft voice. Friday came, and she spent far longer getting ready than usual. Bria always took care with how she looked, but that night, there was an intensity to it. She changed earrings twice. She tried 2 lip colors. She wore a fitted black dress I had not seen before, one that looked elegant enough for a company event, but chosen with more intention than she showed for the average office function. She also wore a perfume she saved for anniversaries and weddings. I noticed that because I had bought it for her. She asked how she looked, and I told her the truth. Beautiful. She smiled in a way I had loved for years, kissed me lightly, and told me not to wait up because these events always dragged later than planned. I told her to have fun. After the front door closed, I stood in the hallway longer than I should have, unsettled by something I could not quite name. Then I went upstairs, put on the suit I had already laid out in secret, and checked the message confirming my arrival time. Corporate had arranged a car. My stomach was tight, but it was not because I expected to catch my wife in anything. I was nervous because I was about to surprise her with what I thought was good news. The hotel ballroom was already buzzing when I arrived a little after 8:30. Glassware, winter centerpieces, polished shoes, the usual bright corporate warmth that never fully hides how calculated those rooms are. An executive assistant greeted me near the entrance and walked me over to a table reserved for senior leadership. That felt more believable than some grand cinematic escort, but in the moment it still gave the night a strange sense of ceremony. The chief executive officer, Vincent Brooks, stood when he saw me and shook my hand with the practiced confidence of a man who led rooms for a living. He said he was glad I could make it and that it would be good for me to meet a few key people before Monday. Then he gestured toward the seat beside one of his vice presidents. That was where I first saw Preston. Tall, polished, expensive watch, easy smile, the kind of man who knew how to enter a room as if it were already his. Vincent introduced us. Preston Ellis, recently promoted vice president of sales after relocating back from Seattle. Preston shook my hand firmly and welcomed me to the company like we were two men at the beginning of a normal business relationship. He had no idea who I was, and that made sense once I thought about it. Bria had kept her maiden name professionally. Preston had likely heard about the husband in vague, dismissive shorthand, if he had heard my name at all. He certainly had not been presented with a framed portrait of our marriage. People who are sneaking around do not usually preserve full context. Vincent announced to the table that I would be starting Monday as regional director over operations across multiple local divisions, and that tonight was simply a quiet introduction before the formal announcement. Preston congratulated me. He asked smart questions about my background. He sounded competent, which somehow made everything worse later because it meant he was not reckless from stupidity. He was reckless from entitlement. I answered him, shook hands around the table, and tried not to look too often toward the bar area where clusters of staff were laughing beneath hanging lights. Then I saw Bria across the room with several coworkers. She was smiling at something someone said, one hand loosely around a drink, posture relaxed in a way that did not match the anxious story she had told me about wanting to avoid her ex. She had not seen me yet. A few minutes later, Preston's phone lit up on the table. He glanced down, and the change in his expression was immediate and intimate in a way I recognized at once. The smile was small, private, self-satisfied. He angled the screen away on instinct, but not before I noticed the preview of a message and the beginning of a line that read, "I see you." My chest tightened. He typed back under the table with the casual confidence of someone who believed he was sharing a joke with a willing partner in the same room. Then Vincent, making idle conversation, asked whether Preston had anyone special attending that night. Preston gave a dry little laugh and said he was divorced, but something promising had recently come back around. Vincent asked if it was serious. Preston lowered his voice, not enough to keep me from hearing. He said it was an old flame, a woman he had dated years ago, and that reconnecting had reminded him what chemistry felt like. He added that her husband was some remote tech guy who barely paid attention, and that she had made it clear her marriage was hanging by a thread. Then he glanced toward the bar. I followed his eyes and found my wife looking down at her phone. That was the moment the floor seemed to shift under me. It was not dramatic in the way movies show it. No ringing in my ears. No sudden slow motion. It was uglier and more precise than that. A series of things clicking into place so fast they hurt. The midnight glow of her phone in the den. The careful way she asked me not to come. The perfume I bought her. The softness in her voice when she used the word trust. My first instinct was not rage. It was humiliation. Not just because she had betrayed me, but because she had rewritten me to another man as if I were a burdensome detail in the way of her excitement. I could have exploded. I could have dragged the whole room into something loud and crude. Instead, I took one breath and made a decision that still feels like the only respectable thing I did that night. I was not going to shout. I was not going to beg. I was going to walk directly toward the truth and make them stand in it with me. I stood up, excused myself from the table, and headed toward the bar while Preston, still talking, fell in a step behind me without yet understanding why. Bria saw me when I was still several yards away. The shock on her face was so complete it erased every practiced expression she had arrived with. Her hand jerked, her drink slipped, and the glass shattered on the floor near her heels. The co-workers around her went quiet, not all at once, but in spreading pockets as attention moved from the sound of breaking glass to her expression to mine. Preston stopped beside me and said, "Wait, you know her." I looked at him, then at Bria, and kept my voice calm. I said, "You two have obviously already reconnected, but since introductions seem incomplete, let me help. Bria, this is Preston. Preston, this is my wife." The word wife landed between them like a dropped weight. He stared at me, then at her, then back at me. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I added, I am Warren. I start Monday as the new regional director. Bria whispered my name like she was trying to wake from a nightmare. One of her coworkers took a step backward. Another looked down at her phone as if pretending not to witness it, which only made the humiliation feel sharper because everyone was listening. Bria reached toward me and said it was not what I thought. That sentence was almost insulting in its reflex. Not because it was false, though it was, but because it suggested I was too stupid to assemble facts already laid out in front of me. I asked her, very quietly, whether she wanted to explain why she told me to stay home, because her ex might make things awkward while he had just informed me she had been telling him our marriage was practically over. Preston lifted both hands in a gesture that looked more self-protective than remorseful. He said she told him they had been texting for weeks, that she felt invisible at home, that I was always working, that we were living separate lives under the same roof. Bria started crying before I even looked at her again. That told me enough. Then Preston made it worse by trying to help himself. He said they had planned to get drinks after the party somewhere quieter because it was easier to talk away from coworkers. Bria closed her eyes when he said that. That tiny reaction gave me one more piece of truth. She had not only hidden the relationship from me, she had planned a second half of the evening I was never supposed to know about. The boldness of that almost impressed me. She had wanted me home while she continued the night with him. I did not stay long after that because there was nothing to gain by turning pain into theater. I told Vincent there had been a personal emergency and that I would explain privately. He looked from me to Bria to Preston with the expression of a man realizing he had just watched a corporate event become a human disaster. He asked if I needed anything. I told him no. As I left, Bria followed me to the hotel corridor, heels clicking fast over the floor, voice cracking as she said my name again and again. She kept saying they had not slept together, as if that distinction still protected the marriage she had already hollowed out. I turned then and asked her one question. What exactly did you think was going to happen after tonight? She froze because that was not a question she had prepared for. I asked whether she planned to come home, lie beside me, and keep building two stories at once. She started saying she had been confused, that it had gotten out of hand, that she liked the attention, but had not meant for things to go this far. I told her confusion does not write lies this detailed. Then I walked away before she could say anything else that might try to make me responsible for my own betrayal. I did not go home that night. I drove straight to my brother's house in the western part of the city and knocked on his door close to midnight. He took one look at my face and let me in without questions. His wife made up the guest room while I sat at their kitchen island staring at a glass of water I had not touched. Around 1 in the morning, Bria began calling, then texting, then calling again. I put the phone face down and let it vibrate itself tired. Somewhere around dawn, after almost no sleep, I remembered an old tablet at our house that had once been linked to our shared cloud account before Bria upgraded phones. We had not used it in months, but the message sync had never been properly disabled. My brother drove me home early, waited in the car, and I went inside alone. The house looked indecently normal. Her scarf on the chair, her mug in the sink. The life of us, sitting there like a stage set after the actors have left. I found a tablet in a desk drawer, charged it, and watched the messages populate slowly. Not all of them. Enough. More than enough. There were weeks of flirtation, complaints about me, lies about the state of our marriage, suggestions for meeting, and explicit plans for a hotel the following weekend, while she told me she would be at a work conference. Reading those messages was worse than the reveal at the party, because there was no adrenaline left to protect me. It was just language, time-stamped and deliberate. She had told Preston I was safe but dull. She had mocked the weight I had gained, though it was maybe 10 pounds at most and half of it from a winter spent working brutal hours. She told him I hid behind video games instead of paying attention to her, leaving out the part where I'd taken up gaming on weekends because she repeatedly told me she needed quiet time to decompress and did not want me hovering. She told him I made good money, but never wanted to spend it on fun, leaving out the savings account we had built together for a bigger house and the family plan she had nodded through at the dining table. What struck me hardest was how she translated my efforts into flaws to make her betrayal feel justified. Every sacrifice became neglect in her version. Every act of restraint became emotional absence. And mixed into all of it were messages where she accepted my love in real time. One night, she texted him that I had just rubbed her shoulders because she said she had a headache, and that sometimes he makes it hard to be the villain. Preston answered with something slick about how good women settle for comfort when they deserve passion. She replied with a laughing emoji and did not correct him. I called a divorce lawyer that same day, not because I'd already become cold and efficient, but because the alternative was sitting still long enough for my self-respect to start bargaining with my grief. The lawyer was blunt in a way I appreciated. Emotional affairs are still affairs, he told me. Planning matters. Written evidence matters. Financial concealment matters. Lies matter. He advised me to preserve everything, stop arguing directly, and communicate through counsel as soon as possible if the situation escalated. Bria came to my brother's house a Sunday afternoon, crying hard enough that my sister-in-law could hear her from the kitchen. My sister-in-law told her I did not want to see her. Bria kept saying she had made a terrible mistake, that she loved me, that she had ended it in her head, even if she had not yet ended it in practice. That phrase alone told me she still wanted credit for intentions she had never acted on. My brother went outside and told her to leave before he called the police. She left eventually, but not before saying she knew I would calm down once I understood that nothing physical had happened. There was something almost astonishing about the selfishness in that. As if the absence of one line crossed erased every other one she had sprinted toward. Monday morning, I put on a suit, took a breath that felt like swallowing glass, and reported for my first day as regional director. Vincent met me before the larger staff meeting and apologized for the situation without pretending he could soften it. Human Resources was already involved because multiple employees had witnessed a public confrontation tied directly to two members of management. Preston was placed on administrative leave pending an internal review, not because the company had some fairy tale moral clause about chasing married women, but because he had used company events and work access to pursue an inappropriate relationship with an employee, created a conflict risk, and then misrepresented the situation once questions began. That explanation felt real. Messy, procedural, unsentimental. Bria called in sick. I was grateful for that because I did not know if I could walk into a conference room and see her face without every sentence in my mouth turning to stone. The department heads kept things professional. People avoided staring too openly, but office gossip travels faster than policy memos, and I could feel the awareness all around me. There is a special humiliation in learning that strangers may have been watching your marriage crack before you even knew it was under pressure. The next week was a blur of legal calls, ignored messages, and work that turned out to be the only thing capable of structuring my days. Bria sent more than 100 texts before I blocked her. Some begged, some explained, some tried, subtly, to reposition her choices as symptoms of loneliness rather than acts of deceit. Her mother called and apologized in a low, exhausted voice that sounded genuinely ashamed. I did not know what to say to that, so I said very little. Midweek, the company terminated Preston after a deeper expense review uncovered irregular claims tied to personal travel and entertainment. The affair did not get him fired by itself. It simply pulled on a thread that led somewhere uglier. He called me from an unknown number one night, drunk and furious, accusing me of destroying his life. I told him he had done that before I ever learned his name. Then I hung up and documented the call for my lawyer. Bria moved out and went to her parents' house. She tried once to drop off a handwritten note through building security in my office, and I refused it. Through counsel, I made clear that all communication should go through attorneys. That was the first time I felt something solid return to me. Not peace. Not yet. Just structure. Boundaries. The beginning of dignity rebuilding itself. The one face-to-face conversation that mattered happened a little over a week after the party. She waited for me in the parking lot outside the office garage because security had turned her away from the lobby. She looked worn down in a way I had never seen on her before. No polished hair, no careful makeup, just a woman standing in the cold with regret she could no longer style into something flattering. She said she only needed 5 minutes. I stayed by my car and told her talk. This time the excuses came layered, which made them more human but not more forgivable. She said Preston had made her feel visible at a time when she had started resenting the routine of our life. She said she felt embarrassed by how much she needed attention and had not realized how far she had drifted until everything blew up. She said every time I did something kind, She felt more guilty and more trapped because admitting the truth would force her to confront what kind of person she had become. I let her finish. Then I told her the part she still was not saying clearly. She had accepted love she knew she was betraying. She had used my trust to make room for another man. She had told lies about my character to justify desires she did not want to own. And while I was trying to move closer to her, she was planning to disappear from me for an entire weekend under a false work excuse. She cried hard then, but it did not move me the way it once would have. Pain is not the same thing as innocence. I also told her something I needed her to understand for my own sake. I said the real damage was not just that she wanted someone else. Attraction happens. Temptation happens. Marriages go through dry seasons and selfish seasons and lonely seasons. The real damage was the method. She let me work toward us while she narrated me to someone else as a burden. She let me save for our future while telling another man I did not know how to enjoy life. She let me honor requests for space, then weaponize that space as evidence of neglect. She took every decent thing I did and translated it into failure so she could feel less cruel about wanting what she wanted. That is why I cannot trust therapy to fix it. Therapy can help with weakness. It cannot resurrect respect once contempt is settled in. She said she would do anything. Counseling, separation, transparency, whatever I asked. I told her I wanted a divorce in silence. I told her if she kept showing up where I was, I would have my lawyer handle it formally. She nodded like someone being sentenced, but the truth was the sentence had been written by her own choices long before I spoke it aloud. The months that followed were less cinematic than people like to imagine and harder in the boring ways no one applauds. Paperwork, financial disclosures, inventory lists, attorney emails that made my chest tighten before I even opened them. Because Pennsylvania does not wrap up a marriage overnight, the process took time, which is how it should be when a shared life is being dismantled. We negotiated property division, accounts, and the practical remains of what used to be love. I kept the house by refinancing and buying out her share of the equity. She kept her car and part of the savings. It did not feel like victory. It felt like controlled demolition. At work, Bria was transferred to a different department outside my operational chain, so there would be no direct oversight issue. I saw her once from across a hallway months later. She looked away first. One of her former coworkers quietly apologized to me at a coffee shop, saying people had noticed the closeness between her and Preston before the party, but assumed either I knew or it was some temporary office rumor. That conversation stung because it confirmed how visible my humiliation had been to others while I was still inside the marriage believing in it. But by then the pain had changed shape. It no longer felt like a knife, more like a scar you keep touching to make sure is finally closed. About 6 months after the party, the divorce was finalized. By then I had stopped measuring time by the night I caught them and started measuring it by smaller signs that I was becoming myself again. Sleeping through the night, going a full day without checking whether I still felt angry, cooking for one without feeling abandoned by my own kitchen. I joined a gym, not because of anything she said about my body, but because I wanted my life to belong to me again in visible ways. Work grew intense, but rewarding. I turned out to be good at leading people through messy transitions, probably because I had become unwilling to waste energy on anything false. A few weeks before the divorce became final, Bria sent a handwritten letter through her lawyer. She said therapy had forced her to confront how hungry she had become for validation, how much resentment she had stored instead of speaking honestly, and how easily she mistook being desired for being valued. She wrote that I had offered her steadiness, loyalty, and a future, and she traded all of that for fantasy and flattery. That was the first time she described the loss accurately. I read the letter once and filed it away. I did not hate her. Hate would require more emotional investment than she gets from me now. What I feel is finality. She gambled a marriage, a home, a future family, and the respect of the one person still choosing her every day. And in the end, the truth did what truth always does. It arrived, stripped the fantasy bare, and left her standing in the wreckage of her own decisions while I walked forward without her. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.